Okay, today we're going to talk about properties of parallelograms. So the first property of a parallelogram is that two pairs of opposite sides are parallel. Okay, so in the diagram you will see usually arrows. Remember, this tells us that those two sides are parallel to each other. And then we can also say that AD and BC are parallel to each other as well. Okay. Not always will they have the markings. Sometimes they'll use the parallel symbols to let you know. Okay. And so an example of this, remember that parallel lines have the same slope. So if we're given points, we can figure out if this is a parallelogram by checking the slopes on both pairs of opposite sides. So if you're given graph paper, you might as well just use rise over run. You could use the formula that I provided here. However, with the graph, I would think it would be easier just to kind of figure out the rise over the run and check that. Okay, so I'll give you a moment, pause the video, and figure out the rise over the run. And you want to do it for both. So you want to see if the two blue sides have the same slope, and you want to see if the two red sides have the same slope. If they do, then we can say that those two sides are parallel. So go ahead, pause the video, and try it out. Okay, so if you figured out the slope, you should see that the blue lines, so BC and AD, so BC and AD, the slope of both of those lines is 9/3, or we could just say 3. Okay, and the slope of the red line, so that's BA and BA and CD, those equal 8/3. So both have the same slope, which means that those lines are parallel, and we could say that this is a parallelogram. Okay, moving on to the next property. Next property of a parallelogram says that opposite sides are congruent. Remember, congruent means equal or of the same measure. The way you'll see this marked is AB is equal to CD and AD is equal to BC. So if we're given a problem like the one here, usually if there's numbers on the outside, they're talking about the sides of the shape, not the angles. So when I'm looking at this, this is a parallelogram, so that means that those two sides are congruent. And we can solve this equation by setting up an equation and solving for x. Okay, we know that xu is going to be 23, but let's figure out what x equals. You can go ahead and pause and figure it out. Okay, you should have got that x equals 9. Let's go ahead and move on to the next problem. And our next property says that opposite angles are congruent. So angles diagonally across from each other. So that means that angle A and angle C are equal to each other, and angle B and angle D are equal to each other. So if I'm looking at this, that means that S and U are congruent. It also means that T and R are congruent as well, but we don't need that in order to solve for x. So we can set this problem up by saying 11x plus 3 equals 36, and solving from here, you should get x equals 3. Moving on to the next one, consecutive angles. So those are angles next to each other. They are supplementary. Remember, this means that they add up to 180. So the way I like to write this out, I like to mark A and C as X, because remember, they're equal to each other, so they're both X. And then B and D, angles B and D, will mark as Y. So any combination of X plus Y will equal 180 degrees because they're supplementary. So let's look angles B and C. We can say that they're consecutive, which means that they're supplementary, and we can set up our equation like so. Give you a minute to solve for this one. Okay, did you get x equals 4? Okay, that would be the correct answer. You could plug it in to check. And then our fifth and final property. So parallelograms have 5 properties. Diagonals bisect. So bisect means to divide into 2 equal pieces. So they bisect each other. Okay? They bisect each other. Which means that AE is equal to EC, and then BE is equal to ED. However, I want you to remember that BD is not necessarily equal to AC. Okay? BD is not necessarily equal to AC. Okay, let's look at this next example. So it says KD equals 18. Let's go ahead and look where KD is. So KD is 18, and it says that BD is 2x plus 16. Okay, well, we know that because KD is 18, KB must also be 18. So we can set up our equation like this. 2x plus 16 equals 18 plus 18. Okay, and then we can solve for x. So I'm going to pause the video, or you can pause the video and solve for x. Okay, did you get x equals 10? You can plug it in to check. And then the other thing we're going to talk about is if this was plotted on a graph or you were given coordinates. I give you an example. Draw a line from A to C and then from B to D. So which problem am I talking about? That's example 1. So let's go up to the top. We are going to form diagonals in this example right here. So form diagonals. And it says, what formula could we use to calculate that point? So what point am I talking about? I'm talking about where they intersect. So how can I find that point? Well, if BD and AC bisect each other, then it would be in the middle. So we would need to use the midpoint formula. So here's the midpoint formula, and we will see how to use this later on. Okay, so midpoint formula. Okay, moving on to the next. Let's talk about the angles formed by diagonals of a parallelogram. So in the first 2 sets, I asked you to mark the interior angles. So the interior angles, the alternate interior angles here would be, that's one set of alternate interior angles. And here is, here is the other set. Okay. Remember, the angle has to touch the transversal. So this is the transversal and the parallel lines. So if you think about it, you might be asking, okay, well then why does it work with the red angles? Well, because AB and DC are not the only set of parallel lines here. So if you look, the blue touches the transversal and the parallel lines. However, there's two sets of parallel lines. If we look at it from this point of view, then the red angles touch parallel lines and the transversal. Okay, let's move on to the next. So here, very similar. And same reason, because you got two sets of parallel lines. Third thing, let's mark the vertical angles. So we have a set of vertical angles here and another set here. Last example of how we can solve this, well, they're alternate interior angles, so those two are congruent to each other. So we can say 3x equals 45, so x equals 15. Okay, I would like you to stop here. You can try the bottom four problems, but you don't need to.